Hey everyone, quick look at this. See that? Almost 98% of you watching aren't subscribed yet. Subscribing is the best way to not miss any new infidelity stories and support what we do here. It's free and it makes a huge difference. Hit that subscribe button below. Okay, now to today's story.
You know, it's funny what you remember most clearly when everything falls apart. It's not always the big explosions, the shouting matches you see in movies. Sometimes it's the quiet, the crushing, deafening quiet of a life. You built meticulously, brick by perfect brick, only to realize you forgot to leave any room inside for yourself to actually breathe. People looked at my life, George's and mine, and they saw success, I suppose. Nice house in a good neighborhood, trimmed lawn, 2 cars, a son heading towards college soon. The picture-perfect suburban dream, right? But pictures are flat. They don't have depth. They don't show the echoing silence inside the frame after the camera clicks. They didn't show me sitting at the granite countertop island in our state-of-the-art kitchen, feeling about as connected to my own life as I was to the stainless steel appliances, cold, functional, and mostly just reflecting everything else around them. George was there. Physically, he occupied space in the house, made noise sometimes, the clack of his keyboard late into the night, the murmur of a conference call, the flick of the TV remote. We existed in the same orbit, like 2 planets sharing a solar system but never quite aligning. Never feeling each other's warmth, communication had become efficient. Transactions. Did you pick up the dry cleaning? Parents' dinner is Saturday. Don't forget recycling day. It was like we were running a small, moderately successful, emotionally bankrupt business called our marriage. The passion, the laughter, the late-night talks that used to stretch until dawn, they'd evaporated so slowly, I barely noticed they were gone, like steam fogging a mirror that eventually just clears, leaving only the stark reality. I remember this one evening particularly well. It wasn't special. That was the point. Just another Tuesday. George was glued to his laptop at the dining table, Deutz tapping away, brow furrowed over some quarterly report or budget projection, something vital to the world, apparently, but miles away from our world. I'd made dinner, his favorite, pasta, trying, I suppose, in my own quiet way, to bridge the gap. He ate quickly, eyes still flicking to his screen between bites. "This is good, Luce," he mumbled, but it was automatic. The same way you'd say bless you when someone sneezes. No connection. Afterwards, silence settled back in, thick and heavy like dust. I was clearing the plates, the scrape of ceramic on the placemat sounding unnervingly loud in the stillness. I looked at his profile, the way the light from the screen cast sharp shadows on his face, a face I once knew every line of, every expression. Now, it felt like looking at a stranger. A wave of loneliness so profound washed over me, it almost buckled my knees right there in the kitchen. It wasn't just sadness, it was this hollow ache, this feeling of being utterly, completely unseen, invisible in my own home. Is there anything lonelier than being lonely right next to someone? I don't think so. I'd tried early on to talk about it. Tentative approaches, gentle nudges. "George, I feel like we don't talk anymore." Met with tired sighs, reassurances that everything was fine, just busy, you know how it is. Eventually, I just stopped trying. It was easier than facing the deflection, the subtle dismissal that made me feel needy, demanding. So I retreated into myself, tending to my garden, reading books, creating this little internal world where I wasn't quite so alone. The house was beautiful, yes, spotless, organized, but it felt like a museum display of a life, not a life being, lived, just emptiness polished to a high shine. Then Jacob moved in next door. It was sudden, really. Old Mrs. Henderson had passed away. Bless her heart, and the house sold quickly. We hadn't paid much attention until the moving trucks arrived, and then there he was. Jacob wasn't just young, he radiated life. Energy. Like someone had turned the color saturation way up on our muted beige street. He was George's best. Friend from college, someone George hadn't seen much of lately but always spoke of with a kind of nostalgic fondness. Seeing him again seemed to momentarily jolt George too. A flicker of his old self surfaced as they clapped each other on the back across the freshly cut lawn dividing our properties. Jacob had this easy smile, a way of looking directly at you when he spoke, like he was genuinely interested. He laughed loud and often. He helped carry groceries without being asked, remembered names, asked questions. He was vibrant. A splash of bright, unexpected color in my monochrome existence. He was younger than us, maybe late 30s, single, after a recent breakup, starting fresh. And he was friendly. Overly friendly? Maybe. Or maybe I'd just forgotten what genuine, uncomplicated human connection felt like. He'd pop over to borrow a tool, stay for a chat. He'd compliment my garden, noticing the specific flowers I babied. Small things, trivial things, really. But after years of feeling like part of the furniture, being seen, even in these small ways, felt significant. Dangerous, maybe? A tiny warning bell went off somewhere deep inside, the part of me still loyal to the picture-perfect facade. He was George's friend. He was the neighbor. He was younger. But another starved part of me, the part drowning in that silence, just leaned towards the warmth he offered like a plant desperate for sunlight. It was just neighborly chat, just friendly smiles, nothing more. At least, that's what I told myself, standing there at the sink, watching him laugh with George across the lawn, feeling a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a very, very long time. A little spark in the quiet darkness. It's strange how things grow, isn't it? Like those flowers I fussed over in the garden. You start with a tiny seed, give it a little water, some attention, and before you know it, it's got roots, leaves, a life of its own. Sometimes it grows exactly where you planted it. Other times, sometimes you find things blooming in places you never intended. That's sort of how it was with Jacob. It didn't happen overnight. It wasn't some dramatic movie scene where our eyes met across a crowded room. It was slower, sneakier. It started with those small things I mentioned. The chats over the fence while I was weeding, him asking about a good local mechanic, me offering him a cold drink on a hot day when he was wrestling with his lawnmower. Innocent stuff. Neighborly. George was usually working, even when he was home. Plugged into that other world behind his screen. Sometimes he'd join us for a bit if he was outside. They'd talk about old college days, sports, things I wasn't really part of. And honestly, I think George liked having Jacob around. It was like having a piece of his youth nearby, a reminder of who he was before the mortgage and the quarterly reports took over. He didn't seem to notice anything else. Why would he? I was just Lucy, the reliable wife, puttering in the garden, making coffee, part of the scenery. But Jacob talked to me. Not just at me, he'd ask about my book club, what I was reading, really listen to the answer. He noticed when I got my hair cut. One afternoon, I was trying to wrestle a stubborn rosebush into submission, getting scratched up for my trouble, and he came over, laughing. Not unkindly, just amused. "Need a hand there, Lucy?" he asked, rolling up his sleeves. And just like that, we spent an hour working side by side, talking about everything and nothing. His disastrous dating attempts, my son's latest college application drama, the weird noises his attic made at night. It felt easy, natural, like breathing after holding your breath for too long. George came home in the middle of it, saw us sweating and covered in dirt, and just grunted a hello before heading inside, probably already thinking about his emails. He didn't ask what we were doing, didn't offer to help. It was just normal. My world, his world. Separate. But standing there with Jacob, dirt under my fingernails, actually laughing, I felt a pang of something sharp. It wasn't just the contrast between the two men. It was the contrast within me. The me who felt alive and engaged versus the me who felt like a ghost drifting through her own house. The real shift, the moment I couldn't ignore anymore, happened a few weeks later. It was a Saturday afternoon, one of those perfect early summer days. George was supposed to be helping me clean out the garage, a task we'd been putting off for months. Predictably, he got an urgent call from work about 20 minutes in and retreated to his office, leaving me surrounded by dusty boxes and forgotten relics of our life together. I sighed, feeling that familiar wave of resignation wash over me. Just as I was about to give up and haul everything back into the clutter, Jacob appeared at the open garage door, holding a couple of beers. "Looks like you drew the short straw," he said, that easy grin spreading across his face. "Thought you might need some moral support, or at least hydration." He didn't even mention George's disappearance. He just seemed to understand. He stayed. He helped me sort through boxes, handed me things, made jokes about the hideous ceramic duck I'd forgotten we even owned. We created a rhythm, passing boxes, making piles, the easy camaraderie filling the dusty space. Then I reached for a heavy box on a high shelf, misjudged its weight, and felt it start to slip. Before I could even yelp, Jacob was there, his hands covering mine on the box, steadying it. His other hand landed firmly on my waist to keep me balanced. It wasn't inappropriate, not really, just supportive, protective, but the jolt that went through me wasn't about the box. It was the warmth of his hand through my thin t-shirt, the sudden, intense proximity, the way he looked down at me for just a fraction of a second, his eyes serious before the smile returned. "Whoa there," he said softly. "Careful." My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. My skin tingled where he'd touched me. The air felt thick, charged. He let go quickly, stepping back, and we both sort of laughed it off awkwardly, turning back to the boxes a little too fast. But the innocence was gone. That casual touch, that fleeting moment, had crackled between us, igniting something undeniable. It was like finding a hidden switch and flipping it on, flooding a dark room with sudden blinding light. And in that light, I saw the truth. I wasn't just lonely, I was dangerously, undeniably attracted to my husband's best friend. The seed hadn't just sprouted, it was starting to bloom, right there in the dust and clutter of my neglected life. And God help me, I wanted to water it. After that moment in the garage, well, things weren't the same. Couldn't be. It was like a switch had been flipped, as I said, but now the light stayed on, illuminating everything with this uncomfortable, buzzing clarity. We finished cleaning the garage mostly in silence, the air thick with unspoken words. When Jacob finally left, giving me a look I couldn't quite decipher, was it apology, desire, maybe both? I felt shaky, unsteady. I went inside, back to the quiet house, the silent husband tapping away in his office, and felt like I was vibrating on a different frequency than the rest of my life. That night, sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt the ghost of his hand on my waist, saw that brief, intense look in his eyes. It was ridiculous, a fleeting touch, a shared moment sorting junk. Why was it consuming me? But I knew why. It was the first spark I'd felt in years, maybe decades, a sign that the pilot light hadn't completely gone out inside me, even if my marriage felt like a cold hearth. The guilt started almost immediately, a sour taste in my mouth. I lay there next to George, his steady, even breathing a familiar rhythm I suddenly found irritating. He was right there, oblivious, trusting. And here I was, fantasizing about his best friend, our neighbor. It felt cheap, tawdry. But underneath the guilt, shamefully, treacherously, there was also a flicker of excitement. A dangerous little thrill that scared and exhilarated me at the same time. For a few days, Jacob and I were awkward around each other, overly polite, avoiding eye contact, like teenagers who'd almost kissed behind the bleachers. I'd see him getting his mail when I was watering the petunias and quickly duck back inside. He seemed to be keeping busy, working late or disappearing on the weekends. Part of me was relieved. Maybe it would just fade away. That strange energy. Maybe we could go back to being just neighbors, just George's friend and George's wife. But another part of me, the lonely, starved part, felt a pang of disappointment. Had I imagined it all? That intensity? Was I so desperate for connection that I'd manufactured a moment out of nothing? Then, one rainy afternoon, George was stuck late at the office. A common occurrence. The power flickered, then went out completely, plunging the house into dim, gray light. I was fumbling for candles when there was a knock at the door. It was Jacob holding a powerful flashlight. "Everything okay over here?" he asked, raindrops glistening in his hair. "Saw your lights go out. Mine are still on, weirdly." He stepped inside, dripping slightly onto the entryway rug, filling the space with his presence. The silence of the powerless house seemed to amplify everything. The drip of water outside, the sound of our breathing. We stood there for a moment, the beam of his flashlight cutting through the gloom. "George is working late," I said, stating the obvious. He nodded slowly. "Yeah, he texted me. Big deadline." He didn't leave. He helped me find the candles, his fingers brushing mine as we both reached for the lighter. This time, neither of us pulled away immediately. The air crackled again, louder this time. He looked at me, really looked at me, in the flickering candlelight. And I saw it clearly then. The same hunger, the same conflict I felt, mirrored in his eyes. "Lucy," he started, his voice rough. I don't know who moved first. Maybe it was me leaning in, maybe it was him closing the distance. All I know is, suddenly his lips were on mine. Tentative at first, then urgent, desperate. It was like breaking through the surface of water after being submerged for too long, gasping for air. Years of pent-up longing, loneliness, and unspoken desires seemed to pour into that kiss. It wasn't gentle or romantic like first kisses are, supposed to be in stories. It was raw, almost frantic, fueled by everything we shouldn't be doing. When we finally broke apart, breathless, the reality of it hit me like a physical blow. Oh God, what had I done? He looked as stunned as I felt. I shouldn't have done that, he stammered, running a hand through his wet hair. "George," but even as he said it, his eyes were searching mine, asking a question I didn't know how to answer. I should have sent him away right then. Locked the door, drawn the curtains, pretended it never happened. That would have been the smart thing, the right thing to do. But standing there in the dim, rain-soaked quiet, feeling more alive and seen than I had in years, the right thing felt impossibly far away. Instead, I heard myself whisper, "I know," and I didn't ask him to leave. That kiss opened a door. A dangerous, rickety door I knew led nowhere good. But I stepped through it anyway. It started with stolen moments, a lingering conversation, in the driveway when George was inside, hands brushing accidentally when he came over for a barbecue. Then, more deliberate plans. Meeting for coffee in a town nearby where no one would know us. A walk in a park on the other side of the city. Each secret meeting was a shot of adrenaline, a temporary antidote to the crushing monotony of my life. The validation I felt when he looked at me, when he listened, when he touched me. It was intoxicating, like a drug. I felt beautiful again, desirable, interesting. Everything I hadn't felt with George in so long. But the high always came with a crash. The guilt was a constant companion, a shadow clinging to my heels. Every time I laughed with Jacob, a voice whispered, "Betrayer." Every time I lied to George about where I'd been, just grabbing groceries, meeting Sarah for lunch, a piece of me chipped away. Living a double life was exhausting. The constant vigilance, the fear of a misplaced text message, an unexpected phone call, George coming home early, it frayed my nerves. Yet, I couldn't seem to stop. I was caught in the current, swept away from the shore of my old life, paddling frantically in secret towards an island I knew, deep down, was just a mirage. Living two lives is like trying to walk a tightrope in a high wind while juggling. At first, maybe there's a thrill to the balancing act, the concentration it takes, the gasps from the imaginary crowd below. But eventually, your arms ache, the wind picks up, and you realize you're very high up with no safety net. The affair, with Jacob settled into a strange, stressful routine. Coded text messages, whispered phone calls when George was in the shower or out walking the dog. Carefully planned errands that took me to quiet cafes or secluded parks miles away. We became experts in logistics, in alibis, in reading each other's signals. Across a crowded barbecue in our own backyard. It was exhausting. Every ping of my phone made my heart leap into my throat. Was it him? Was it George wondering where I was? Every time George suggested a spontaneous weekend plan, panic flared. Would it interfere with something I'd arranged with Jacob? I found myself becoming hyper-aware of everything, analyzing every word George said, every look he gave me. Did he suspect? Did that question about my long lunch with Sarah carry an edge of suspicion, or was it just my guilty conscience working overtime? Mostly, I think, he suspected nothing. George operated on logic, on schedules, on the predictable rhythm of our life. Betrayal, especially from his wife and his best friend, likely wasn't a variable in his calculations. He seemed the same, still absorbed in work, still emotionally distant. Sometimes I'd look at him, sitting there reading the paper or watching TV, and a wave of guilt so strong would hit me, I'd feel physically sick. This man, whatever his faults, had built a life with me, trusted me implicitly. And I was systematically dismantling that trust, piece by treacherous piece. Other times, though, a hard knot of resentment would form in my stomach. If he'd just looked up, if he'd just listened, if he hadn't let that chasm grow between us, would I be here? Would I have sought warmth elsewhere? It was easier to blame him, wasn't it? Easier than facing the stark reality of my own choices. Jacob? Well, Jacob was complicated. He was my escape, my confidant, the source of that intoxicating validation, but he was also George's friend. Sometimes I'd see them together, laughing about some shared memory, clapping each other on the back, and the weight of our deception would feel immense. I could see the strain on Jacob too, sometimes. A flicker of guilt in his eyes when George would talk about how great it was to have him living next door, how he trusted him completely. We rarely talked about George directly. It was the elephant in the room, or rather, the ghost at our secret table. When we did, it was usually couched in anxieties. "Do you think he knows?" Jacob asked me once, his voice tight, after George had made an offhand comment about me seeming distracted lately. The fear was real for both of us, a constant undercurrent beneath the stolen kisses and whispered affections. Was this sustainable? Could we keep compartmentalizing, keep lying, keep pretending? Deep down, I think we both knew the answer was no, but we were too caught up in the storm to find our way back to shore. We were getting bolder, maybe sloppier. The initial hypervigilance started to fade, replaced by a dangerous sense of complacency. A quick kiss in the kitchen when George was upstairs, thinking he was occupied on a call, lingering a moment too long by his car when saying goodbye in the driveway. We were playing with fire, dancing closer and closer to the flames, telling ourselves we wouldn't get burned. There were close calls, of course, moments that made my blood run cold. Once I left my phone in the living room, and George picked it up to bring it to me just as a message from Jacob popped up on the screen. Thankfully, it was innocuous. Something about borrowing a ladder. But the look George gave me? Was it suspicion, or just mild curiosity about why Jacob wasn't asking him directly? I brushed it off, heart pounding, making a mental note to be more careful. Another time we were having coffee at a place miles away, feeling relatively safe, when I saw my neighbor from 3 streets over walk in. We ducked out quickly, hoping she hadn't seen us, but the paranoia lingered for days. Was she talking? Did people suspect? The perfect facade felt increasingly fragile, like thin ice over deep water. The constant anxiety began to erode the initial joy. The thrill was still there, but it was increasingly tainted by fear. The loneliness I'd tried to escape hadn't vanished. It had just shape-shifted into something else. The isolation of secrecy, the burden of the double life. I was more connected to Jacob, yes, but profoundly disconnected from everything and everyone else, especially myself. Who was I becoming? The end. Well, the end wasn't dramatic. Not at first. It wasn't a shouting match or a slammed door. It was quiet, deceptively simple. It was a Thursday evening. George had come home early, which was unusual, said he wasn't feeling well, a rare occurrence for him. Jacob had stopped by earlier, just briefly, to return the ladder he'd borrowed. The same ladder from the text message incident. We were standing in the hallway, near the front door, talking quietly, just chatting. But the air between us was still charged. It always was by then. Maybe I leaned in slightly when I laughed at something he said. Maybe he reached out, just for a second, and brushed a stray hair from my cheek. It was a small gesture, almost unconscious, born of the intimacy we shared in secret. Innocent, perhaps, if you didn't know the context. But we knew. And in that exact moment, George came down the stairs. He wasn't supposed to be there. I thought he was lying down. He stopped halfway down, silent. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. The look on his face. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was a slow, dawning comprehension. Confusion morphing into a devastating clarity. He just looked at Jacob's hand near my face, then at me, then back at Jacob. His best friend. And the world just stopped. The air crackled, not with desire this time, but with the sickening sound of everything shattering. The tightrope didn't just wobble, it snapped, and we were all falling. Silence. That's what followed the snap of the tightrope. Not shouting, not immediate accusations. Just silence. Thick, heavy, suffocating silence that pressed in on us, from all sides. George stood frozen on the stairs, his face pale, his eyes flickering between me and Jacob, processing the impossible. Jacob looked like he'd been punched, all the color draining from his face. He stammered something. An apology, an excuse. I don't even remember what. His eyes pleading with George, then skittering away from mine. I couldn't speak. My throat closed up, shame and terror warring inside me. George finally moved, slowly descending the rest of the stairs. He didn't look at me. He walked deliberately towards Jacob, who flinched almost imperceptibly. George stopped right in front of him. I braced for yelling, for violence even, but George just looked at him, a look of profound, heart-wrenching disappointment. "Get out," he said, his voice terrifyingly quiet, level. "Get out of my house." Jacob didn't argue. He practically stumbled out the door, not looking back. Then George turned to me. The anger was there now, simmering beneath the shock, but it was mixed with a deep, cavernous hurt that was worse than any rage. "Lucy." It was barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of 20 years of shared history, now fractured beyond repair. That night, the dam finally broke. Not with tears, not at first, but with words. Cold, hard words laying bare the years of neglect, the loneliness, the misunderstandings, the failures on both sides. And then the betrayal. My betrayal. There was no defense, not really. My justifications about loneliness and needing validation sounded hollow, even to my own ears, in the face of the raw pain I had inflicted. The unraveling was swift after that. It was like pulling one thread that causes the entire tapestry to disintegrate. George moved into the guest room that night, the silence in the house becoming a physical presence, a wall between us. Lawyers were called within days. Conversations became brief, functional, mediated through emails and legal pads. The picture-perfect life we'd built was dismantled with brutal efficiency, dividing assets, selling the house, that beautiful empty house that had been both my sanctuary and my prison. It felt surreal, watching movers pack away the life we knew into cardboard boxes, labeling pieces of our shared past for separate futures. George, understandably, cut Jacob out of his life completely. No calls, no explanations accepted. The betrayal by his best friend in his own home was absolute. I heard later, through the grapevine of neighborhood gossip, that Jacob moved away not long after, sold the house quickly and disappeared. I don't know where he went. Did he feel remorse? Was he just running away? Or did he, like me, feel the sting of being caught in a destructive cycle fueled by momentary desire and profound carelessness? I suppose it doesn't matter. He was a catalyst, maybe, but the fault lines were already there in my marriage, in me. He didn't create the emptiness. He just offered a temporary, disastrous way to fill it. Looking back now, from here, Monday, April 14th, 2025, feels like a lifetime away from that suburban house. It's easy to see the warning signs, the moments where things could have gone differently. If I had screamed, cried, forced George to confront the distance between us years ago instead of retreating into silence. If he had put down the laptop, turned off the phone, and truly seen the woman sitting across the dinner table from him. If communication hadn't failed so spectacularly, maybe the cracks wouldn't have widened enough for someone like Jacob to slip through. But what ifs are pointless, aren't they? They're just ghosts that haunt the ruins. The truth is, I sought validation outside my marriage because I felt invisible within it. I craved the excitement, the feeling of being desired, to counteract the soul-crushing loneliness. It felt like survival at the time, a desperate gasp for air. But the air I breathed in was toxic. It didn't heal the loneliness. It metastasized it into guilt, shame, and irreparable loss. The illusion of perfection shattered, revealing the messy, complicated, and ultimately self-destructive reality beneath. I traded the quiet ache of loneliness for the sharp, jagged edges of betrayal and consequence. It was a fool's bargain. So, here I am, not in the big house, not with the husband, not living the life everyone thought was so perfect. Just me, picking through the wreckage, trying to understand how I got here. The transformation I went through wasn't about finding happiness. It was about understanding the destructive power of seeking it in the wrong places, at the expense of honesty and integrity. I learned, the hardest way possible, that you can't build genuine connection on a foundation of deceit. You can't fix internal emptiness with external thrills. The spark I felt with Jacob, it wasn't real light. It was just the friction of two, lonely people striking against each other in the dark, inevitably starting a fire that consumed everything around us. There's no neat bow to tie this up with, no tidy moral learned without scars. There's just the quiet understanding that some choices carve lines so deep they can't be erased. You live with the echoes. You live with the consequences. And you hope, maybe, that someone else hears the story and chooses a different path. Before the silence becomes too tempting, before the tightrope snaps,